She walked into that courthouse like any other citizen, head held high, scarf wrapped around her scalp, calm in her step. 10 minutes later, she was humiliated in front of strangers, stripped of her dignity by a bailiff who thought she was just another black woman to push around. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she wasn't there to sit in the gallery. She was there to take the bench. And by the time this day was over, he wouldn't just regret what he did. He'd be in handcuffs, facing a courtroom that would never forget her name. It had been 20 years since Grace Langston left Charleston, South Carolina, and she hadn't planned on returning. Not for a wedding, not for a funeral, and certainly not for peace. But death has a way of tugging people back to the places they swore they'd never revisit. Her father, once the town's most feared pastor and a legendary civil rights leader, had passed quietly in his sleep. She came back to bury him, sell the house, and be gone before anyone had the chance to remember her. But as she stepped out of her rental car, the heavy smell of jasmine and humidity filled her lungs with memories she couldn't escape. The courthouse was still there, its stone columns tall, its steps wide, its silence deep. Grace thought she was just coming home to close a chapter. What she didn't know was that her next chapter was about to begin, and it would shake the very walls of that courthouse to its foundation. The letter came 2 days after the funeral, folded neatly between bills and condolences. United States District Court summons. Grace chuckled dryly. Of all the people to call back in, she murmured, tossing it on the kitchen table. She was a retired civil rights attorney with more courtroom hours than most judges and more battles under her belt than the average soldier. She didn't have to report, but something made her curious. Maybe it was the old itch to see how the system had aged, if it had learned or just grown more clever in hiding its ugliness. She decided to go, not out of duty, but to take a long look at the courtroom where she once argued for lives and dignity. She wasn't expecting justice, but she wasn't expecting to be reminded just how deep the rot still ran. The courthouse lobby smelled the same: floor wax, old air vents, and forgotten stories. But the security checkpoint was new: metal detectors, armed guards, cameras in every corner. Grace stepped forward, head high, her blue head wrap carefully tied around her. Scalp, not for fashion, but for comfort. 6 months ago, cancer took her hair. That wrap was more than fabric. It was armor. But the man behind the checkpoint, Bailiff Vernon Tate, didn't see that. "Ma'am," he barked, barely glancing at her ID. "You need to remove that wrap. Could be hiding something." Grace frowned. "It's medical," he smirked. "I don't care if it's royal. Take it off or you don't come in." His eyes held the coldness of someone who'd worn that uniform too long and learned all the wrong lessons. And when she didn't move fast enough, he reached forward, grabbing the edge of the wrap, yanking it free in full view of the lobby. The chill on her bare scalp was nothing compared to the heat of humiliation. For a second, everything froze. Even the marble floors seemed to hold their breath. Her scalp, dotted with pink scars and patchy regrowth, was exposed to the fluorescent lights and the eyes of half a dozen strangers. Grace didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood still, her pride stripped not by illness, but by a man, in uniform, who thought he could. A woman gasped behind her. A young black mother shielded her child's eyes, but the guard said nothing. The metal detector buzzed like it was mocking her, as Vernon Tate muttered under his breath, "Should have come correct." Grace picked up her wrap from the floor slowly. Dignity isn't about not being torn down. It's about choosing how you rise after. And Grace Langston had risen before, from jail cells, from court losses, from death threats. This was no different. But this time, she wouldn't just rise. She'd strike. Unknown to everyone in that room, a young janitor named Theo had been sweeping near the vending machines when he saw it all unfold. He'd only been working at the courthouse for 3 months, but he'd already learned to keep his head down. Still, something about this woman, her quiet strength, her silence, moved something in him. He pulled out his phone, hands trembling, and recorded the moment she was stripped of her head wrap. He caught her scars, her stillness, the bailiff's grin. He didn't know who she was. Not yet. But something in his gut told him this moment would matter. That video would sit in his pocket for exactly 12 hours before it detonated across the country. That night, Grace sat at her father's old desk, surrounded by relics of his sermons and letters from a time when truth was dangerous. She sipped tea, not for taste, but for steadiness. She looked at herself in the mirror, the scars, the aging eyes, the quiet rage. And she remembered the march in '67 where she was arrested for sitting in at the mayor's office. She remembered the courtroom in Birmingham where she was called girl while cross-examining a police chief. "I thought we buried this," she whispered. "But hatred doesn't die. It just changes uniforms. That courthouse may have new paint, but the rot underneath still stinks the same." The next morning, the courtroom was buzzing for a high-profile federal case involving the wrongful death of a black teen at the hands of Charleston police. Grace walked into the chamber, this time not through the metal detectors, not with the jurors, but through the judge's entrance. When the bailiff called "All rise," the entire room stood, and then she stepped into view. Vernon Tate's face drained of color. The same woman he stripped bare in the lobby was now the one holding the gavel. Her robe flowed like a storm cloud. Her silence was thunder, and when she sat down, she didn't look at him. Not yet, because the reckoning would be slow. And she intended for him to feel every inch of it. She didn't call him out immediately. Grace presided over the courtroom like steel wrapped in velvet, polite, precise, deadly. But when the first recess came, she turned her eyes on him. "Mr. Tate," she said, her voice calm and cold, "approach the bench." He stumbled like a schoolboy caught cheating. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You will be relieved of duty pending investigation. And if you think for one moment that uniform gives you power over the dignity of others, I promise you, we're just getting started." And just like that, the man who had embarrassed her in front of strangers was stripped of his badge in front of the nation. By nightfall, Theo's video had gone viral. News anchors were replaying the footage in slow motion. Hashtags lit up like wildfire. Judge Langston trended globally, but Grace stayed quiet. She didn't want attention. She wanted change. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse steps, chanting, praying, holding signs, "Respect Black women," "Dignity has no dress code," "The system is on trial." For the first time in years, the courthouse wasn't just a place of verdicts, it was a battlefield. Calls flooded in to local radio shows and newsrooms. Elder Black residents remembered Tate. "He slammed my husband into the wall in '95. He searched my daughter like she was a criminal for wearing a hoodie." Dozens of voices, all silenced, all now rising. The courthouse clerk whispered to Grace during a recess, "We've had over 50 written testimonies submitted in 2 days." Grace nodded. "Let them be heard, every single one." The defense attorney representing the police department was none other than Victor Carver, the same man Grace once battled decades ago when he called her emotional during a civil rights suit. His hair was gray now, but his arrogance hadn't aged a day. "You're still playing the race card?" he hissed. "No," she replied. "I'm playing the truth, and you still can't handle it." Their courtroom clash wasn't just legal, it was generational, a reminder that history doesn't repeat. It rots, unless someone digs it up and burns it clean. Theo was nervous on the stand. His hands shook, but his words didn't. "I recorded what I saw because I couldn't let it happen again. I was scared, but she stood there like she wasn't. So I figured if she could take the hit, I could take the risk." His voice cracked, but his truth held strong. People in the gallery wept. Reporters lowered their cameras. Even Victor Carver looked down at his notes, unable to meet the boy's eyes. Grace didn't read her verdict. She delivered it like scripture. "This court finds not just negligence, not just abuse of power, but a culture of contempt. And contempt is contagious if left unchecked." The gallery didn't cheer. They cried. Quietly. Because this wasn't a win. It was an exhale after decades of holding breath. She knelt beside the grave, the wind teasing the new growth on her scalp. "Daddy," she said softly, "you once told me someday your silence will be more dangerous than your voice. You were right. I found my voice again, and I made them listen. A single red rose lay beside his headstone. No cameras, no reporters. Just a daughter promising her father the fight hadn't ended. It had just grown wiser. Within a month, legislation passed across multiple districts, modeled after her reforms. Mandatory anti-bias training, officer mental health evaluations, zero tolerance policy for abuse. They called it the Langston Rule. Grace refused interviews, declined awards. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be a turning point. One afternoon, a young law student visited her porch. "Judge Langston," she said, eyes wide. "Because of you, I'm going to law school." Grace smiled, tired but proud. "Then don't let it break you, baby. Let it build you." And as the sun dipped behind the magnolia tree,